I think it's only fair, since you described your spiritual journeys to me, that I should share mine with you as well. And I want to preface this with saying that this is just my personal journey. It is not a standard by any means for anybody else. Everybody else can have their own belief systems, their own spirituality and religious belief systems, and that's perfectly fine. I will accept you for who you are. I will not judge you for what you share or what you believe, and I ask that you just take what I'm sharing with you as my own self-disclosure. I think it's only fair that since you share parts of your life with me, that I share parts of my life with you as well. I grew up in a military family. My father was in the United States Army. He was a Army Corps of Engineers major. He worked with the Chemical Corps, and he was in World War II and every war following that until he retired from the military, and then he worked for the government. Eventually, he went back to his original degree and was a teacher as well. So I spent a lot of time in military chapels, and it was a very different and unique atmosphere. They were usually on military bases, and they were very ecumenical. So even though they were from a Christian standpoint, they were very open and accepting within that context, interdenominational, and I just remember that being a young person, when I was 12 years old, I went through confirmation classes at a military chapel, and I guess I was always searching and questioning, and it wasn't until much later in my life that I understood some deeper answers about my questions. I think I always had faith instilled in me just because it's the way I grew up, in that religious context. But I was unsure or doubting of my own faith, and later on I was able to find the terminology that helped me to describe my faith, and I guess I read a book called I and Thou by Martin Buber. We'll talk about that a little more when we talk about existentialism, and then that led me to other books like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, Paul Tillich's Courage to Be, things like that. But I was always seeking, and what I later found that I was seeking was really that I-thou relationship, an I-thou relationship with other human beings on a deeper level, an I-thou experience with creation, nature, on a deeper level, and an I-thou relationship with the God that I believe in, the Christian, Judeo-Christian God. So I can share a couple stories. I spent a lot of time uh, hiking and camping when I was young. And the Appalachian Trail ran right through central PA. I grew up in a little town called Chambersburg. And I just found a sense of peace uh, when I was in nature. And I would just spend weeks on the Appalachian Trail when I was a teenager. And that helped me to feel connected with creation and nature and the world. And I'll share some more existential moments when we talk about existentialism. Um, Another thing that happened was that um, I was always seeking and wanting to know and understand more. One of the things I was interested in was writing and reading novels and reading religious texts. So when I was an undergrad, I was a English lit major and a psych minor, and that's a nice combination, those two things for me personally. It helped me to get a deeper glimpse into human nature. I think if somebody says, well, what makes a good novel? What makes it a classic? And I would answer it in two ways. In one way, when you read a novel and it touches you in some way, or me in some way, it makes me feel that I'm not alone in this world, that other people have the same questions and struggles and insights and experiences that I do. It also allows me a deeper insight into human nature, a better understanding of what it is to be human and all of our imperfections and all of the things that make our lives truly extraordinary. It's a paradox. We're imperfect and yet perfect. We grow through mistakes. So one of the things that happened was I started becoming more involved in the church and became friends with a minister and started looking into things like Jewish and Christian mysticism, Kabbalah, and started studying other religions as well. And my professor and the minister said, well, apply to all of these master's programs in English Lit, but why don't you apply to a school to study religion and maybe cross-cultural religions as well, something you enjoy. And I did. So fate, divine intervention, whatever it might be, I was rejected by all of the English programs and accepted to one religious program. That was Princeton Theological Seminary. So I went there and I got to know two professors very well. One was Charlie Ryerson, and he taught cross-cultural religious studies. I was always interested in different cultures and different traditions and different religions, and I just found that fascinating. And the other professor was Don Capps, and he taught pastoral counseling. And that brought in the psychological part of it. And it was a really nice combination for my time there. I studied, all the major religions. And after my first year, I had an opportunity to spend some time in India. And I always felt like the world was changing. The world was becoming a more modern place. And I always wanted to experience a place that had not gone through that transformation yet. And India in 1989, maybe 87, about 88, 89, it was like going back into time. There weren't a lot of telephones. People still communicated by telegraph. Um, Trains and buses didn't have glass windows. Um, and a lot of the older cultural traditions had still been maintained. There were no computers. In fact, one of the things that I brought as gifts were a package or two packages of Bic pens. And it was the greatest gift because people still wrote with fountain pens and they would refill them with ink. And to have a Bic pen was was a modern thing for them. Um, so I truly enjoyed my experience there. I studied a Christian religion down on the southern tip of India at a seminary called Martoma. Uh, that stands for St. Thomas. And the old tradition says that each one of the apostles went to a different continent to spread Christianity, and he went to India. And it was a wonderful experience because um, it was an immersion into that religious faith. I also studied different religions when I was there, Buddhism and Hinduism, and I had time to travel through India and experience a lot of different cultures, and I ended up in northern India at an ashram. It was a Catholic ashram, but um, they had incorporated a lot of Hinduism and Buddhism into the experience. So it was in the foothills of the Himalayas, and it was cold, and all the priests wore saffron orange robes. And from a distance, the saying goes, it was supposed to make them look like flames walking across the horizon. The impermanence of a flame, and yet the intensity of that flame. Um, so I went there, I meditated and prayed with the monks, and they always wanted to ask me, well, what was I seeking? And I couldn't really verbalize it at that time. They wanted me to ask them questions, and I wasn't sure what to ask. And I met a very old monk who was not one of the top monks on the hierarchy. He didn't have a degree, hadn't studied in a formal education. He had long gray hair, and he was very elderly. And he had given up all of his possessions and lived there at the ashram. And his name was Maria Bhakti. And I knew that Bhakti had to do with Hindu devotion, and Maria, or Maria, was most likely Catholic after Mary. And I simply was spending some time with him, and I said, well, could you tell me what your name means? And he said, well, it means devotion to Mary. And even though I wasn't Catholic, as we talked, one thing did crystallize for me, and I think it's one of the things that I was seeking. And one of the things that I had learned was that I don't judge anybody for their personal beliefs. I accept people for who they are. And I had studied a lot of different religions, and I understood that each religion was different in different ways. And when he started explaining the meaning of his name to him, the sense of devotion and my need to focus on one belief system rather than all of the belief systems, for me personally, became clear. So the only way I could achieve true personal devotion was through focusing my faith. Uh, and I had learned a lot about all different religions, but for me personally, I had to focus on one, and uh, and that was Presbyterian, Christianity. Um, I like the fact that from a dogmatic perspective, that the church was led as a democracy. Everybody had a say in it, and they believed that God spoke through not only each individual, but the congregation as a whole, so through a vote. Uh, so I did begin to focus more, and I volunteered in a church as a youth director, and um, I loved working with kids in a church, and I ended up getting ordained, and I thought that I would just continue to work with kids uh, as a youth director, but I ended up in two very small rural churches in central Pennsylvania, in Perry County and Millerstown. One was the city church, a big old stone church, and one was a country church, a white wooden church in the middle of a green field. And I was there for a few years, and we ended up combining churches and building a brand new church that's still there today. It's called Highland Presbyterian Church. And that gave me an understanding at a very young age of what it was like to be a minister. And I was quite the liberal minister. People would come far and wide if they needed to get married or baptized, or I wouldn't judge them. I would just accept them with love. And a lot of parishioners would come to me, and I was very young. I was 22, 23, and they would come to me with emotional problems, and I didn't know how to help them. And that's what brought me back to my master's program in counseling. And because I wanted to be able to help people at a deeper, more emotional level. And that's how my path moved into counseling, school counseling, clinical mental health counseling. One other more mystical experience that I'd like to share with you is, I mentioned earlier that I was always doubting my own faith. Is my faith strong enough? Things like that. I would even be asked to do a baptism, and I'm like, who am I to baptize this little baby or this adult or whoever it was? I'm so imperfect myself. I'm not worthy to do this. And I learned a couple things, and this might sound a little strange as a story, but it did mean a lot to me. And one night I had a lucid dream when I was going through a lot of changes in my life. And a lucid dream is a dream that when it occurs, it seems like it's reality. You think it's actually happening. And I dreamt that some type of monster or demon crawled in through my bedroom window. I was at my parents' home, and it was my childhood bedroom, and kind of like a scarecrow monster. And I think in my mind it was all the negativity and sin or whatever, or doubt perhaps. I don't know exactly what this thing was, but it was throwing me around the room like a rag doll, and I struggled and fought, tried to take control of the situation. And when I realized that I had no control over the situation, that there was nothing I could do, I prayed, and I called out for spiritual help to God. And in an instant, it disappeared in a puff of smoke and went out the window very quickly. And I took a deep breath and I woke up, and I didn't know whether it was real or not. I'm like, wow, at first I was frightened, but then I was consoled. And I learned a number of things: that I couldn't control situations, and that control was one of my issues, my personal issues that I had to deal with. I had to learn how to give up control in my life: control of self, control of the situation, control of others. And I had to become mindful and live in the present rather than worrying about the past or the future. And I also knew that when it really came down to it, that I had faith. Because when there was nothing else left, I called upon that faith, even if it was a dream. So it solidified a number of things in my life at that point. And I think my psychological and spiritual state changed after some of these realizations. And I started reading more about existentialism and helping people. And when I became a therapist and a school counselor, I just volunteered as a minister and a chaplain. I spent 10 years as a chaplain at a camp in Wexford called the Woodlands, helping children with disabilities. I volunteered at Shadyside Presbyterian in Bower Hill, in the South Hills, and I think it's affected my life in a lot of positive ways. But I'm a very imperfect person, and I need to be humble, and I continue to work on becoming a better person and growing and understanding. And that's a little bit of my own spiritual journey. And like I said, even though it might be similar to some of yours, and it might be very, very different than some of yours, that's perfectly okay. We're all on a journey, and we're all trying to figure that out, to find meaning in our lives. Thanks for listening and letting me share a little bit of my life with you.